We're talking today now with Susan Marin and with Francis Morphy. And they're from St. Pat's College in Drumcondra. You're very welcome to Disability Matters.
Thank you, we're delighted to be here.
So you might start to letting us know how you got from the early days to here, please. And Francis, we'll ask you first.
Okay, I'm a primary teacher first and foremost, John, and I trained to teach across all subjects, even though my work now is mainly in physical education. And Susan is a secondary physical education teacher. So our combined experience then teaching, we work with two colleagues on the PE team in the Institute of Education, Dublin City University, DCU. And we're both involved in sport throughout our lives.
Brilliant.
And Susan would have been particularly involved in tennis and athletics, and I would have been involved in athletics and camogie. So our professional work then, our day-to-day work, we focus on preparing primary teachers in all of our primary schools to teach PE. And we also undertake research work then related to PE. And I suppose we have a huge interest in the topic of inclusion, and yet we have no lived experience of disability.
Right. And then Susan.
So I think Francis has filled you in really on a bit about our backgrounds. So how did our work really come to focus on inclusion? Well, we've many foci for our work, but inclusion is particularly one. But we had many years teaching experience ourselves before we went into teacher education. And I was faced in secondary school with children, young people coming up to me in the sports hall with disabilities, and we had some education in our course in Thomond on it, but again we were learning on the job because teachers don't come out qualified to do everything. You learn from experience. But in our work in teacher education in the college, we brought our experiences, but also we began to rely on the help and support of people who had built up expertise. So in relation to inclusion, we went to these people when we needed further support ourselves. But we also saw a need for supporting our students, because they were being faced in schools, in mainstream schools, with more and more children with challenges, and they were coming to us looking for our help. So at one stage then, and I'm going back to 2013, we undertook a bit of research. And we asked our students in fourth year, when they came back from school placement, so what supports do you use in the school and what would you like more support with? And from our interviews with those students, we learnt, and it's a simple message but a very important one, we found that when they went out on their school placement visits, they talked to the class teacher, they talked to the special needs assistant, but they never actually spoke to the child who had the challenges. And they are full of information that is very valuable to the student teachers to plan and prepare their lessons. So that was the first key message we began to give our student teachers going out on school placement. Talk to the child, ask them what they enjoy doing, what they're able to do, and they will be great support to you.
Can I just stop you there and ask you one question? How did we get from, say, 30, 40 years ago where there was no inclusion to here?
Well, it's very interesting. I suppose we've become more and more aware worldwide of the rights of every person and every child. And I suppose having all UNESCO have done huge work on the rights of the child, and there's now government policy, to include every child in education and in mainstream school. So there's more and more parents wanting to send their children to mainstream settings for their school and less a reliance on special schools, although there is a need for those special schools and they serve a huge function, particularly children with complex medical and educational needs. But, and rightly so, parents want all their children to be educated in the one school. So I think policy being transferred into action is where our work has come from, and we recognise the children's right to an education, but we go beyond just having them integrated into the school. They must be integrated with the curriculum, and probably physical education is one of the most challenging subjects because all children move. So, but we are also aware of literature that talks about the good day experiences for children and all children, you know, in the class, and the bad day experiences. So we want to give the children more good day experiences. So our research paper in 2013 was called Providing Good Day Physical Education Experiences for Children with Special Education Needs in Mainstream Schools. And we wrote that paper with Dr. Michael O'Keefe, who was working in the School of Policy and Special Education, School of Inclusive and Special Education. So that was our starting point with us. But I also undertook then making 3 YouTube videos with 3 teachers that had built up specialism and expertise. Sean Gallagher in the School of in secondary education in terms of children with visual impairments, and Roisin Kelly, who had an expertise in including children with autism in physical education lessons. And then the third one was with Catherine McBride, who was in a primary school, and she was told she was going to have a wheelchair user in her class from the following year. And she went down the road of preparing a unit of work for athletics, how to include that child. So there were supports that were going to be really valuable for teachers, because teachers struggle with 30 children in their class,
of course,
and them all moving. So they needed further supports on their journey. And each year they were landed with different children with more, you know, different needs, because there's a whole spectrum. And it's not the one size fits all. So that's really where the focus of our work went to. And those videos are on YouTube for teachers.
And tell me this, did you get buy-in from all teachers? Were there any who had a different opinion of where you should go?
Generally, teachers are very positive.
Yeah.
They want to include children, they just may not know how. So I suppose part of our job, John, is, in fact, a large part of our job is to work with the student teachers and try and give them that first rung on the ladder, that they're at that point on the journey as they leave us. So if I give you a few examples, say from our work with the students, we teach them physical education, and we try and say to them, okay, so there's the content now, but maybe if we change your teaching style or the rules or different equipment or maybe the environment or the space, that would help different children within your class. So there's a set of principles, they're called the 3 principles, to do with that styles, teaching styles, rules, equipment and environment. Another useful framework that possibly a number of your listeners would have heard of would be UDL, Universal Design for Learning. And that suggested that we offer children different ways of learning. So for example, a teacher might use a visual cue or an auditory cue, maybe an image, for example, to help a child to understand. And then the child chooses different ways of engaging. So they might work with a friend, or they might work with the SNA, or they might work with a small group. So that gives them a choice in terms of how they'll engage with the content. And then at the end of the lesson, we might be asking a child, you know, what have you learned today? And some children will show you, I've learned to throw the ball into the hoop. Yeah. Other children,
which is a big attainment for them.
Yeah, absolutely, and we celebrate that achievement with them as teachers. Good. But some other students or children might say, "I'll tell you what I learned today," but in fact, for some of them, it's easier to show rather than tell. So they've that choice. So they're how the Universal Design for Learning principles apply on a day-to-day basis with us. So I suppose our research then feeds into the kind of work we do with them in practice.
Right. The embedding inclusion in what you do, were you starting from zero? Or is that a tough question?
It's a tough question because, you know, some people would claim we are. Right. We don't think so. I think good teachers are always doing their best to include. Yeah. But as Susan said already, the fact that physical education is more challenging generally, with the amount of movement involved and the excitement that children show when they're going to physical education, that can be hard for teachers. So sometimes it's hard regardless of children with particular challenges, and we have to support students, teachers to teach basic PE content first, ranging from games to athletics, maybe to dance, gymnastics. So there's quite a lot involved. And then to support individuals within that. So, no, we're certainly not starting from nowhere. And we've made huge progress in the last, I'd say 10, 15 years in particular, that there's been a lot of initiatives that have helped us.
And I suppose teachers' attitudes are generally positive, but they struggle with how to adapt activities, and partly because there's 30 children in the class.
Big problem.
Yeah, not to talk about others with challenges. But and the other thing is, games would be very popular for teachers to teach, but games, as opposed to athletics or gymnastics or dance or outdoor adventure, is actually found to be one of the most challenging to include children with, because children are moving in and out of areas, and whereas in athletics they tend to work in lines, and and it's easier to, and not that it's easy, it's easier when you know how to adapt, but like, if teachers can get the message right, maybe I should need to change the content of what I'm doing in my planning rather than relying on games. And in Ireland, a lot of teacher tends to have games experience, and certain sports are popular. Right. And one day a child might feel included in one activity, but for another child, they mightn't feel included at all. So the feelings change from day to day. Yeah. So it's a constant struggle for the teachers. And also, when undergraduates are in university, they are quite distracted with their lives and many other subjects, that they come out of university feeling, we learned nothing on it. But their journey only begins with the experience, and they do need a lot of support. And I suppose that's where we need continuous professional development to help these teachers. And many times they rely on their colleagues, for support and maybe associations, but we still need more and more professional forces for them, and when they're out there on their journeys. And that's where sometimes, a lot of these organisations are very supportive, and there's been more and more resources being produced and awareness in organisations to help the teachers.
I suppose when you're talking about primary school, children are starting to develop, their minds are starting to grow, they're starting to get more inquisitive, and they may not have had a lot of play or a lot of games and so on, so they're kind of new to them.
And that's why we try and emphasise physical education is where every child is, because there's wonderful work going on outside by sports organisations, but often some of the children who are in school never get to go into after school activities at all. So that's why the role of the teacher, the primary teacher in the PE class, is crucial. Just talk to maybe, John, about some of the research that feeds into it that we've been doing.
That's important.
And it is important. And I think that the first aspect is the work about the good day experience that Susan talked about. We were involved in a very interesting project that, Susan, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about it, disentangling primary PE, which was an Erasmus or a European funded project. Susan will tell you a little bit about it.
And it was really interesting, and this is where, European funding for these projects is really a positive, thing to be involved in, and we had many European partners and many organisations involved in it. But two key findings came from it, and we've a website toolkit as well to help teachers with it, with our findings. But it was research led, and two key findings from it was that inclusion of children in physical education is an interaction all the time between the teacher and the child. The curriculum content, so what the teacher is planning to teach in every lesson and over a unit of work, that's really important, and it interacts with the child and the teacher and what they can do. And the last one is the environment. Is it indoors, outdoors, the light, the noise, so it's constantly changing, which is challenging for the teacher. But the other key finding that came from that was, out of a class of 30 children, teachers have reported up to 5 children in their class with additional needs. Yeah. And the most common ones are motor and challenges and social and emotional. But that's not, every class doesn't have a wheelchair user or a visual impairment or a hearing one. So but it's just as important, those ones.
They don't define disability.
Exactly.
Wheelchairs and so on.
Well, not at all. But at the same, we recognise there's 30 children in that class, and they're all learning differently.
Of course.
So even though they might identify 5 with an additional challenge, there's 30 that are all learning differently, and this is what makes it very challenging for the teacher. So we developed our toolkit, and it's available online. We can give you the links afterwards. And it's a support for a teacher who may have a social challenge, a child with a social challenge, a physical challenge, an emotional one, a medical one, and they can go in there and they can delve down between how can I change my curriculum, how can I change my teaching style, what resources are there. And it was great because we have a European flavour to it, and we were all able to bring our learnings together to put into the website. So that was one of our research projects. Another one is at the end of, or in fourth year, our students undertake a final year thesis. And our focus on that for a number of years has been on inclusion.
Okay.
And the student teachers use their experiences on school placement. They read literature and they interview their class teacher, and they take their learnings from that and write it up in a report. So that has been a nice development for these teachers going out into schools. We're not saying they know it all, but it has taught them to reflect and, to know that there are supports out there.
And just that there are three other, I suppose, aspects then in terms of research that we focus on. So just outline very briefly for you. One is the Masters by Research that I'm actually supervising now with Dr. Sinead Macaulay, and she works in the Special and Inclusive department in DCU. And the focus is on including a child more fully who has a visual impairment. So the student, Niamh Boylan, has interviewed teachers and said, what supports do you need? And now she's at the stage, she's heard what the teachers are saying and want, and now she's going to try and take that on to PhD level and work through providing the support. So that'll be an interesting project. Another project that's ongoing at the moment, I'm working with Dr. Joe Travers on it. We're working with a student from Cork who's based in a post-primary setting, and he's working in a mainstream setting with students with intellectual disability.
Very good.
So again, there it's saying what's best for these students, and he's going to talk to the students themselves.
Brilliant.
And say, what would you like? Going back to what Susan was saying earlier. And I suppose, the third aspect of research that we want to keep, I suppose, emphasising is the fact that we ourselves are inviting people all the time to take that inclusion theme and maybe draw some part of it and engage in research with it. So there is a lot going on. You know?
They must have been great areas of research to be involved in because they sound so interesting.
Yeah, now it's getting more and more challenging due to getting permissions, ethical permission.
Yeah.
You can't, you now have to look at the whole class rather than individuals within the class, to respect everyone's privacy and,
which is important.
Yeah, very important,
of course.
Because it has gone, it has come from extremes, really.
Yeah.
But at the same time, teachers get frustrated because how can I help this child, with these needs, so, sometimes teachers, and they're probably right, they're pushing for more supports, but it is a challenging area for research also.
And especially because in primary, PE is one subject out of 12.
Yeah.
So teachers need support in others as well. So, they're visiting teacher support, for example.
Yeah.
But that rarely touches on physical education. Whereas we're trying to say, well, we can help you with this.
Very
and
good.
now to develop the best ways of helping. So I suppose, in summary, Susan spoke earlier about the feeling of the child, feeling integrated and included. So there's certainly a progress in that area. People are aware now of the importance of that. We've also seen progress in terms of the research. There's certainly more and more research and a lot more that we can read about. We've also come back from a conference.
Yeah.
Susan, you might want to
Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was down in the Munster Technological University. They have the UNESCO Chair for Inclusion in the world, which is in physical activity, and it's thanks to the CARA organisation that Pat Flanagan set up a number of years ago. And so the conference was held down. There was the International Symposium of Adapted Physical Activity.
Right.
And it examined progress on UNESCO's their mission to deepen international cooperation, dialogue and understanding through inclusive sport. And this is an area that has a fast moving journey with it. And I presented on our work in our university. But it also, like, there's so much work going on there, even for, we'd say, supports for taking children and adults hiking in the mountains, developing special chairs that are being developed, developing special tools to help people with visual impairments, you know, go hiking in the mountains. It's no more than we've seen it in playgrounds. You know, the equipment in playgrounds has progressed to cater for all children. So it's a very exciting time, you know, and so important for all children to have these supports to take them. So it was very inspiring, a lot of the presentations that we were at there. But it also looked at sustainable development goals and how we're meeting them and the rights of people with disabilities. So it was on for the week, and there must have been 400 or 500. Yeah.
We find now with all of the groups that we speak to, they're all involved in supporting people with disabilities.
Yeah.
But they've been doing research for so long, and it's just starting to come to fruition. And it sounds like yours is too.
Well, you need the research to be put into action. I think the research can't stop at the paper and the ink, you know, and that's where I think, you know,
Action
we need
speaks.
to see it in the environment, you know.
And it is helpful for us in PE to know about all those other bodies like Active Disability Ireland, the various national governing bodies, the Tennis Ireland, GA, FAI. I mean, they're all RRFU, they're all making serious efforts now to include more children. The Sports Partnerships is another group. Paralympics Ireland obviously is out there working with the more elite athletes and so on. So it's really good. But bringing it back into PE then, where we have to start, all children at the very young age have to learn their fundamental movement skills, the running, the hopping, the skipping, the jumping, the rolling, to the best of their ability. And so that on a daily basis, all teachers are challenged to try and help children with developing those skills. And like, we look at a game like Rounders that so many people are familiar with.
Everybody played years ago.
But what we've got to look at now and say, how can that be made more inclusive? So we've got to avoid this thing of a big queue of children waiting to bat and children running around dying to get that ball to retrieve it. We've got to say, okay, this can be done better. The team can be smaller, a smaller group. We can adapt the rounders. We can adapt the equipment they use so that the bat is easier for the child, the ball that they select. So all of these small things for a very typical game like rounders, as we all think we know. But yet we've got to say what really happens there so that a child feels good about the game and enjoys it regardless of their ability.
And that's for every game, I think.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And then it's important that we give all children a choice. So you put a range of bats and balls down because you don't want any child to feel they're different. You know, and even if there is a special needs assistant, it should be there for all the children because you don't want it associated with one particular child. So this is where the Universal Design for Learning framework is a valuable way for teachers to think, you know, about their teaching.
And even if it's about gymnastics, because sometimes we think it's about games, because that's the one, like Susan said, that we're most familiar with. Sometimes a teacher could be teaching a child to balance, but the teacher needs a little bit of extra knowledge to teach the whole class about balance. And then on top of that, he or she needs to know what's the best way to help this child with this particular challenge to balance. And that might be a child who's struggling to concentrate. It could be a child who's struggling to see, a child who's struggling to hear the instructions. So there can be so many little additional threads to it.
If we take it back to disability, the child might have a little hidden disability that nobody knows about.
That isn't evident at all. That's a very good point, John. Absolutely. So look, there's huge progress. We really feel there is. And we do our best with student teachers, and then we need someone to keep the journey going with the teachers. We do work on research with teachers, we do work with teachers, but it needs to be nationwide.
Yeah, and I think because of all the sports partnerships, everyone needs to work together. And I think there's more of that, you know, maybe need more collaboration, you know, knowing what the other is doing. But there's certainly huge awareness out there now, which I think we've come a long way in to know that we're all aware of it at this point, you know.
We spoke a while back with the sports coordinator for Fingal.
Right.
And she goes around to all the schools, all the primary schools in particular, just to support them in their PE program and so on. So, and that's a great role she has.
It's a very important
and she's a very progressive person too, which is great.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's also an organisation I'm heavily involved in, and Frances was one of the founders of it, the Irish Primary PE Association.
Yeah.
And it's a voluntary organisation, and we have a website, and we've set up a little community of experts, of teachers who are willing to help other teachers who are struggling with children with particular additional needs. And these are our expertise that have made the videos, and they're willing to help teachers if they want to contact the Irish Primary PE Association. And we've an annual conference. But it's a way of providing further supports for teachers. But we do need more at school level and whole school level, and experts coming out who are teachers, supporting these teachers in schools.
Brilliant. I think it's a fantastic project. We're right at the end of our time. You'd be glad to know.
Thank
Is
you
there
very much,
anything
John.
else you'd
Great.
like to put out before we stop?
I think probably most importantly today is to say the fact that you're talking to us
Yes.
means that we're highlighting the various issues that affect physical education, because there's an awful lot about sport, but we know that a lot of children don't even get as far as sport.
Of course.
Without that grounding in physical education that's so important. And also for teachers to feel that they have a really important role.
Of course they do.
And then the support people that you've talked about coming in to support, absolutely, but the teacher has to be first and foremost central to the whole inclusion of that child. So it's been wonderful to talk to you, John. Thank you very much, because every opportunity we get to raise issues like this is adding more to the richness, to the journey that we're all on.
And I suppose one other thing I might just add in is, like, physical education is very different to physical activity, and is very different to sport. And in physical activity, the children learn physically, socially, and cognitive or knowledge. And it's very important not to leave these children out of the class, because socially it's so important that they are mixing with their peers. And physical education offers that uniqueness and importance over physical activity and sport. And all children are in the physical education or in school, whereas all children are not in sport. So that learning is important, So.
Well, look, we leave it there. Susan, Frances, thank you so much for talking to us on disability matters.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
You're very
Pleasure.
kind.